History. History. History is more than just important because we remember facts and dates. One other reason that history is important is that history reminds us about purpose, about why we do what we do. You see, we can become disconnected with purpose over time. Without a sense of purpose, people tend to focus or lose focus on what's important as time goes on. As time passes, the original band of elders is replaced by new leaders. Unless each new generation understands history, new generations lose the benefit of lessons that were learned by elders. The passage we ponder today that Zach led us in reading outlines the condition and situation that Jesus confronted when he selected 12 of his followers and made them apostles, meaning they were sent out in his name. That's the word apostle is, someone who's sent out to liberate people oppressed by sickness. The 12 apostles, perhaps representing the 12 ancient tribes of Israel, were instructed to focus their ministry efforts exclusively among Jewish communities. This was a Jewish-only ministry effort at the beginning. At the end of Matthew, that ministry effort was expanded in what we know as the Great Commission to all the nations, all people, everywhere. But at the very beginning, it's very specific. Jesus empowered those 12 men to announce that the realm of heaven, the kingdom of heaven, the rule of heaven had arrived. As agents of that realm, the apostles were to heal the sick, they were to raise the dead, they were to cast out demons, they were to cure lepers. In other words, they were to deliver healing and restoration without cost. Without cost. To people oppressed by sickness. The ministry of Jesus began as health care. I need to say that again. The ministry of Jesus began as health care. The apostles were directed to travel light, live frugally, live among and accept hospitality from the people they served, and to leave wherever they were not welcome. If you are not welcome, don't try to stay and fight. Don't make a fuss. Go and keep on pushing. Keep on pushing. And the apostles were expected, they were warned to expect opposition, to expect harassment, and to expect persecution. It is interesting that we remember, it is important that we remember, it is important that I emphasize that the religion of Jesus did not begin as an effort to proselytize. Jesus was not trying to increase the number of the church. He was not trying to pack the pews. He was not trying to expand his territory. He was trying to make people whole. As Betty sang, he was trying to bring the touch of God and make people whole. His ministry effort plainly began as an effort of compassion focused on delivering people from the oppression of social conditions that were not being addressed by the government, that were not being addressed by the established religion, that were not being addressed by the social agencies of that time. People were suffering from various debilitating illnesses, physical and mental. Their needs far exceeded the available resources. At Matthew 9:36, the social situation was documented by these memorable words. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd are fitting words for many people today. Veterans of U.S. military adventures are harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. They are harassed and helpless because of physical wounds and by the residual effects of memories and emotions too painful for words. They are harassed and helpless. People in rural and urban communities are harassed and helpless because the air and the soil and the water on which they depend have been poisoned by industrial polluters, whether you're in South Louisiana or South Mississippi or Flint, Michigan or someplace else. If you don't have clean water, if you don't have clean air, if you don't have clean soil, you can't be healthy. You're going to be sick. Workers are harassed and helpless by business policies aimed at producing profits while holding down wages while demanding more production. Isn't it kind of interesting that Walmart, the world's biggest retailer, now plans a pilot program to have workers in some locations on their way home from work deliver packages from the bought online? Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Harassed and helpless. What you going to say to Walmart if you say, I'm on my way home. I got to meet my children for daycare. I got to fix food for my family. I got to take care of my mother. Deliver this package. Harassed and helpless. People of all ages are harassed and helpless by the politicians who are trying to dismantle the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Don't forget the patient protection part of that. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. Hey, the religion of Jesus began as a ministry of healing and restoration, and now folks who call themselves followers of Jesus are jumping up and down because some politicians want to dismantle the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Folks are harassed and helpless. People are harassed and helpless, oppressed by the sickness of addiction to various substances and situations. It was a war on drugs when the war was heroin and cocaine and marijuana, but now it's opiates. We are finally realizing we got a health condition. People are harassed and helpless. In the meantime, we're still getting folks going to prison because of their addiction. The religion of Jesus did not begin, I say it did not begin, and it should not be confused with a prosperity gospel. Let me say it again. I think you missed it. The religion of Jesus did not begin with and should not be confused with a prosperity gospel. Jesus did not tell his apostles to charge a fee when they went about the ministry of healing intractable diseases and delivering people from oppressive psychological and mental conditions. Jesus didn't allow the apostles to charge a fee because he was motivated by compassion, not commerce. So when you hear folks today call on folks to sow a seed in order to reap a blessing, that's a far cry from the ministry that Jesus conducted. You don't find that in the text, okay? That's not in the gospel. I 10 times double dog dare you to begin in Matthew and end in John's gospel to find where Jesus told anybody to sow a seed and reap a blessing in order to be healed. Hello? Sow a seed in order to get cured. Hello? Sow a seed in order to be raised up. Hello? That's not the gospel of Jesus. That's the prosperity gospel. And you can say prosperity gospel without it being the gospel of Jesus. Just don't hook Jesus with it. That's the gospel of the preacher who's trying to get more prosperous. That's not the gospel of the Jesus who sent out his apostles saying, you receive freely, freely give. The so-called prosperity gospel is the gospel that has people contributing money to religious enterprises that provide mansions and luxury automobiles and private jets and private security officers for a handful of religious opportunists. When the pastor has to have a Learjet and a Bentley and a mansion and then have to have a security detail in order to make sure that people don't get too close, you can be sure that is not the gospel that Jesus was talking about in this text. However, we should not miss the point that people used religion during the time of Jesus, as during our time, as a ploy to exploit others who are helpless and harassed. Notice that Jesus at Matthew 10:16 said, "See, I am sending you out like sheep in the midst of wolves." Remember, he said earlier, Matthew earlier says, when Jesus looked out on the people, he saw them as harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Sheep without a shepherd are always at the mercy of wolves. And what wolves are predators. Wolves can outrun sheep. Wolves can outsee sheep. Wolves can outfight sheep. And so wolves always win over the sheep. Jesus reminded his apostles they were to be shepherds to provide for sheep, but they needed to also be mindful they were going to be in a situation surrounded by wolves. And he wasn't talking about the politicians. He was talking about the religious folks. He was talking about the religious people. He cautioned the apostles against trusting religious wolves. He warned the apostles that religious wolves will hand you over to councils and flog you in their synagogues. You understand, the wolves were in the synagogues. You will be dragged before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. The gospel of Jesus began as an effort in compassion, not a religious enterprise focused on having the most members, the biggest budget, the most buildings, and the biggest clout with the government. That's not the gospel of Jesus. That's of Jesus Christ. That's the gospel of Constantine. Constantine, that 4th century Roman emperor who supposedly converted to Christianity after he realized he couldn't persecute the Christian faith to death, so he decided he would co-opt it. He would capture it. We have to be very, very careful in faith that we don't become so interested in being accepted by the rulers that we make our religion the religion of the rulers. When religious people emphasize the number of baptisms and the number of people who attend our services and other meetings and the financial impact those gatherings have on an economy, we're not talking about ministry to the harassed and helpless. We're talking about Wall Street. Those are Wall Street statistics. That doesn't mean you don't concern yourself about paying the bills and doing other stuff, but we got to remember something, that faith in God is about ministry to the broken people in God's broken world. It's not about trying to build our empires. I emphasize this because the religion of the gospel of Jesus was never intended to become an empire. It began and should remain focused on healing and restoring broken people and our broken world to wholeness with God. We are custodians of a healing and restoration ministry, not a business enterprise. We are trustees of the compassionate and the merciful will of God to help the helpless, to give voice to the unheard, to pay attention to the overlooked, to protect the weak and defenseless, and to welcome immigrants and strangers. And whenever you see followers of Jesus taking up with folks who are hurting the helpless, overlooking the ignored, not protecting the weak, but exploiting them, and shunning immigrants and strangers, you are seeing a heresy. You are not seeing gospel. You are not seeing the gospel of Jesus and compassion. You are seeing the gospel of empire. Our greatest authority as followers of Jesus, my sisters and brothers, is not about the size of our buildings, the grandeur of our buildings, the size of our budget, the number of people who attend our services. Our greatest authority as followers of Jesus comes from what we do on behalf of people Jesus called the least of these. And that power comes not by what we do here. That power comes by what the apostles did in this text, by walking among and living with suffering people, by witnessing their struggles and being part of those struggles, by hearing their stories and being moved to act in God's name on their behalf. You see, compassion comes from deep within us. You heard about the term, the bowels of compassion. That's what it comes from. Compassion comes from our heart. What comes out of our pockets is supposed to be work that advances the compassion. Compassion does not come from Wall Street. It comes from here. It is a response to suffering. We intentionally put ourselves in position to see and then to address in the power of God. Like the 12 apostles, we don't have any power in ourselves to meet the needs of the people. What did Jesus say? The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. The harvest is always greater than the laborers. We don't have any power in ourselves to confront and overcome the oppressive realities of our time and place. There are always going to be more folks who who get all up in arms about going to the next war than folks who call for peace. There will always be people who will be in line to profit off of oppression than we are able to stand up against oppressors. Now, as in the time of Jesus, the harvest is still more plentiful than the laborers, but that doesn't mean God doesn't need laborers. It makes laborers all the more important. Now, as in the time of Jesus, the wolves are still around, focused on making religion comfortable for themselves, if not luxurious, instead of restoring sickened and wounded lives. Now, as in the time of Jesus, religious wolves and self-serving political actors are acting in concert to build empires of power, empires of domination, empires of privilege. Not a world where all persons can live and thrive with God-given dignity and peace and love. So let's be clear. The gospel of Jesus Christ was fundamentally different from what was happening in the synagogues of Judea and Galilee when Jesus lived, and if we'll be honest, is fundamentally different than what a lot of folks like to focus on. We spend a lot of time fussing in church meetings about who's going to be over the money, who's going to head the choir, what size is the building going to be, what color are the walls going to be painted, who's going to boss this. Jesus spent next to no time on that. gospel of Jesus was focused on healing people, broken people. The gospel of Jesus focused on showing that God's love gets close to people who are broken and marginalized. God's love heals. God's love restores. God's love teaches. God's love lifts. And the work of God's love is done only when we, like the apostles of Jesus, show up as compassionate healers and restorers instead of religious capitalists. That's what I call our church movement. It's religious capitalism. You know, let's go to church. Let's go to church big. If you go to church big enough, you can go a baby church off of that one and try to get it big. And you can tell how big it is because how big the budget is, and how many members they have, how many buildings they have. Get that big enough. It's like it's the Walmart approach to church. Isn't it kind of funny that no matter how many buildings we have, our buildings are worth nothing if people do not have better lives? Does it really matter how big the religious palace is if the people who live around the palace are broken? God sends us like Jesus sent the apostles into the world as healers and restorers because of the compassion of God. God loves suffering people. God sends us into the world to show God's love to suffering people. And then God, in God's power, heals, restores, lifts suffering people. I should make a point and notice that Judas wasn't the only one who turned away from Jesus. Judas was just the one we read about most. We read about Judas selling out for 30 pieces of silver. But how many of us have sold out in church life for something like that? I mean, I've known some preachers who said the most important day in the church year is the pastor's anniversary. Oh, really? Oh, really? Oh, really? Now, as was true when Jesus sent the apostles out, we still seem to face overwhelming odds. We still seem outnumbered. We still appear less favored. Our strength comes from God. Our resources are provided by God. And this is the truth that runs throughout the Bible. The Jesus people that were sent out to heal and to restore went about trusting that God would somehow work through them. They focused on their work without wondering how big their pension fund would be, because they were concerned about compassion, not about commerce. And that meant it was always good news whenever they showed up to suffering people. You understand, when the people of Jesus show up to give compassion, suffering folks want to see you show up. But when we show up and the most important thing on our mind is money, suffering folks don't want to show up. Broke folks do not want to see us if the thing we're talking about first is, listen, the building fund needs this, or that. People who've been ignored by powerful folks don't want to hear us talk about how much we want them to give us so they can give them so we can have power. They want us to know what we can do that their lives can be empowered. The good news is that the grace of God comes without expecting anything back, but giving. And this is controversial. This is controversial because we live in a world that is defined by what we can get back. We live in a world where outcasts, poor people, sick people are not sought out. The gospel of Jesus turns that upside down. So what we're told is to go out, get up, and do something in the name of God without worrying about how many people are going to come, or how many people are going to pay, or how much it's going to cost. We are told to go and do this because we are sent out by God. We are told to give to people who have nothing because we are giving from the heart of God. We are told to go out and touch people who are down and out and not call them, as President Trump says, losers. These are not losers. That's Mr. Trump's words. They are God's family. This is how the gospel of Jesus began, with the folks that now are called losers. The gospel of Jesus began with the folks that now are called the not beautiful people. The gospel of Jesus showed up among the people who are not on the fashion page, not on the society page, but were overlooked. And so I remind us of this because the history of the church should be remembered as we live out the mission of the church. This is what the gospel of Jesus was at the beginning. This is what the gospel of Jesus must always be. Let us resolve to continue it in the spirit in which Jesus sent out the first apostles. Amen.